It seems like after after a short period of relative calm on that issue, things are no longer so calm, and I just want to share where we are and what we're working on. First, the Oil and Gas Conservation Commission is in the midst of a rulemaking to revise its flow line regulations. This is an initiative arising out of the summer's discussions that arose out of the spring's events in Firestone. That rulemaking hearing has been scheduled for mid-December until just yesterday, and it was pushed back until just January 8th and 9th. In Denver will be a rulemaking hearing that will address integrity requirements, that will address registration of domestic tap, crude oil transfer lines, and some other matters. That rulemaking also takes place in the context of a lot of work here in Broomfield. The voters, 10 days ago or so, passed Initiative 301, Measure 301 here in Broomfield, 57 to 43 margin. That measure gives the City and County of Broomfield plenary authority, and it comes on the heels of a really productive and intensely negotiated agreement between an operator seeking to do business here in Broomfield and the City Council. A process that we have sought to encourage over the last few years, where a local government can reach an agreement with an operator to implement measures that go above and beyond the rules. We are happy to see those measures in permit applications and incorporated into permits with the state issues that have worked really well. Felt like that didn't go far enough, and again approved this Measure 301 by a 13-point margin. And so the oil and gas discussions here in Broomfield are very wholesome. Finally, on oil and gas, I want to talk a little bit about a subject that we've been discussing at the department and a little bit in the General Assembly for the last couple of years, and that's the subject of orphan wells. These are wells for which there's no viable operator. Either the company is out of business or they can't come into compliance with our rules. And those wells come to be wards of the state, and we need to address those for public safety, health and welfare, and environmental protection. And the challenge really is finding money for that purpose. Cost to plug and abandon an orphan well is about 6 times greater than the financial assurance that we hold for those wells. And that's an average. It doesn't hold an average. It's a cost to remediate the environmental impacts at a site, the well site, the certification. Those average actual costs exceed financial assurance by a factor of about 14. Tracking about 244 known orphan wells in the state of Colorado, require plugging, and about 300 associated locations for reclamation. And in addition, there are about 400 undiscovered orphan wells, we believe, in historic oil and gas fields around the state. These are in the Rain-2 field, some in the Fremont County area, again, oil fields. And the pace of new we believe. What we call distressed operators. These are operators that each operate at least 10 wells. Wells are offline or are low producers, producing at about a third of the stripper well rate. And collectively, these distressed operators own wells in the state of Colorado. Again, these are wells that we are tracking or operating. And not all of these distressed operators abandon their wells, but we think it's reasonable. And the state, again, would inherit the responsibility for so the funds that we have available for this purpose comes to about $500,000, $445,000 fund. We've also claimed about $400,000 in initial assurance on these wells. We've been able to fund about a dozen wells a year, and we're claiming somewhere under 10 orphan well questions. So again, that's so I share all of this just for the decency of these many, many years with backlog of believe that number of and while we could look at rating correlate increasing the financial assurance for each of these wells, for new wells, those would only correspond for the next 5 years. So again, this is an issue that we continue to work through the agency, and HC come up before they don't complete the spring, and will of course be a part of those conversations. But again, just in terms of sharing what keeps me up at night, that's one of the many things. I want to touch just for a second on another topic that we've been working on a lot in the Executive Director's Office. The state of Colorado is actively engaged with Interior Department staff and other Western states as the Trump administration weighs whether and how to reopen BLM's land use plan amendments that were adopted to conserve greater sage grouse. The office through John Swartout has conducted stakeholder outreach, and it appears we are coalescing around some smaller targeted changes to the plans in Colorado and making those recommendations to Interior. Those changes would allow for some increased flexibility while still maintaining protections for the species that we think are critical to maintaining the not warranted decision under the Endangered Species Act for the greater sage grouse. So greater sage grouse is it is keeping us busy. Department's legislative agenda going into the next session. We should get feedback from the governor's office next week. We'll begin pursuing sponsors and pursuing our agenda there. I want to just mention that we closed the annual, every 2 years, the governor's office has input through an employee engagement survey, and that closed just this last week. All state employees, 2 years ago, we had a 63% response rate. That represents over 900 employees at the Department of Natural Resources weighing in with feedback on how we can improve state service to both our employees and our customers. And we look forward to seeing the results of this year's survey as well. I just want to mention, and I have a couple of things that I can share if people are interested. Up at Colorado, the Warner College of Natural Resources has, and this is Dean John Hayes, what I think is a pretty exciting effort. It's called the Natural Resources Pipeline Partnership, to create an inclusive student body that can lead to an inclusive workforce in natural resource management out into the future. His goal is to generate a workforce in natural resources that reflects the demographic breadth of society, and feels that And that, Mr. Chair, is my report. I'm happy to take questions on any of that or on anything else.
Questions for Director Randall? Thank you. Very good report. Let's move to IBCC Director, Dr. Stolp. Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Board. Couple things have transpired since we last met as the annual Inter-Basin Compact Committee report was presented to the legislature by email on the end of October. We give an annual report, and that's available to all of you online, or if you want, why, we'll get you a link to it, as well as at the same time the Water Supply Reserve Account publication that goes out annually, showing what has been spent in those areas, how those funds have been distributed. So that's available if you'd like to look at that link. We are firming up the agenda for the November 30th IBCC meeting. Will be at the West Denver Marriott, and be a full day. We have, I think I mentioned last time, we've had some interviews with many of the IBCC members, and that's helped drive the agenda. And so we're going to be working off of that discussion on goals setting for the coming year or two, and what topics they feel would be appropriate for them to engage in further. We're going to have a little bit of a historical review on how we've got to where we're at. And among other things on the agenda, we'll have also an update on the Colorado River Minute 323, as well as drought contingency planning and some other things like that. So it'll be kind of a build off of, I think, of what this board's going to get at some of this meeting. And you're all always invited to come and be participants in that activity, that board meeting, and we'll make arrangements to have you at the table. Yesterday was an interesting day in which a number of us around this table participated in a shepherding discussion, which has a direct relationship to the Colorado River. And so as I looked around the room and tried to recall who all was there, we had representation from the Upper Colorado River Commission. Actually, the full staff, Don Osler and Amy Haas, were there and contributed, as well as Conservation Board, the IBCC, Front Range and West Slope representation, the State Engineer's Office, represented Catlin, Colorado State University, University of Colorado, as well as the Attorney General's Office. So it was a great representation by people that have a strong interest in water. And we'll be discussing some next steps with IBCC if they want to look at this as one of the topics to take up. We've sent out to the IBCC about 8 topics of interest that we've heard as we conducted phone calls around the state, and we'll see what comes out of that. We're going to have a facilitated meeting on the 30th. To try to keep us on track and get through the agenda in a timely manner. So a lot of things going on here yet this month. And so at that point, I would stop and see if you have any questions of me.
Questions for Director or Dr. Stoll? I don't believe so. Great report. Thank you. Let's move to the Agricultural Commissioner, Mr. Chris Wiseman. Thanks for having us here, Chris.
Well, first, welcome. We're pretty proud of our building here. We've been here for about 3 years, and it really is a good facility. We're in the process of, there's a vacant lot right behind us here, and we're in the process of developing new labs out there. We're actually going to sell our property that's down in the Highlands area off of Zunai, and then we've sold our property down by the National Western to the National Western. Bob's been gracious enough to give us some temporary storage space for some of the stuff that we have to relocate. But hopefully in about 1.5 years, you'll see a new facility out there, new labs. Some of the money is $10 million worth of marijuana funds. But it's really marijuana that has caused the problem that we need to expand our labs and be more effective. So the money's going to the right place. One of our initiatives that Don put into place a couple of years ago is that we wanted to put more of an emphasis on public lands and federal lands interaction between the Department of Agriculture and the federal agencies in the state to help farmers and ranchers who are impacted. There's been issues where people have had grazing rights for 100 years, and all of a sudden the BLM or the Forest Service comes in and makes it difficult for those people to continue. And so Dawn and I went to a conference and realized that all the other states around us had federal lands experts. And so we decided to sort of revamp our conservation division and make that a part of it. And, you know, when you try to get a program up and going quick, you do what everyone else does. We stole the public lands guy from New Mexico, and Les Owen came in and is doing a great job for us here. But now we're going to the legislature to expand that program because we are finding that he is not enough, and that another person in helping out in that position could really help us protect ranchers and farmers' rights. We're not trying to do anything that violates federal law. We have just found out that you have to have that interaction with them as they're moving forward when they're assessing your grazing rights. And so, you know, that's really been an important program for us. All the rest of our legislative agenda this year, just cleaning up some of the statutes and some sunsets and things like that. This will be the last meeting I'll be here with you. I'm actually retiring in 15 days and going to spend all my time in Pueblo instead of the weekends, and looking forward to that. So thank you.
Questions for Chris? Actually, I thank you very much, Chris, for all your service, and I hope that you have a very pleasant retirement. Back to the grazing thing, I would like to thank the holder, and it is very important to all of us, the liaison, so to speak, with the permitting issues. I mean, it really does help us out. So
Les didn't, when he came in, he didn't miss a beat. He just made it happen, which is really nice. I don't know what New Mexico's doing right now, but we're certainly moving in the right direction. So
anyway, thank you very much. Dr. Stolp.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I too would like to thank Chris for his service to the state. He's served in a number of administrations, but more recently, when I was at the Department of Ag, he was the state fair manager and got it back on its feet, so to speak. And so he's going back to Pueblo, that they think highly of him, and for a good reason. And so I too wanted to offer my congratulations for his service, and he's entirely too young to be retiring.
All right, let's move to CWCB Director Mitchell.
Thank you. I would also like to echo the thanks for having us here today. It's always one of my favorite places to come, partly because it saves us money, but they're very generous here at Department of Ag. So the big news in our agency, I would say we've been very productive since our last meeting, but some of the most productivity has come from the hiring of some new staff or stealing of them, depending on who you're talking to. The first one would be Jack Landers. Jack, can you wave? Jack is new to the stream and lake protection section. He holds a master's in environmental science and a bachelor's in fish and wildlife management. He was interning with us before, and so he filled Brian Epstein's position with that departure of going south when Brian moved to South America. So he'll be focused on stream gauging and water measurement, and we're really happy to have him. Also, Rachel Pittinger, can you? Rachel's in the funding and finance section. She's going to be a project manager, but she comes to us also, and Kirk's very happy about it. She comes to us also with some background in rotational fallowing. So we're going to use her however we please, Kirk. Whatever suits the agency, really. And then a change that most of you all know about, Brent Newman is the section chief now for the interstate and compact section. He came back from Louisiana and was doing some of the agricultural work and quickly moved up. So we're lucky to have him and his background and have him back. And then Lauren Riss was the steal that I was talking about. You might have heard Bob was a little upset with me. You all know Lauren Riss, so it's a comfortable and great fit for the agency. And so we're looking to use the new assistant director. However, we use Lauren also. So, and we get a lot of FTEs for the big bang for the buck is how we like to work it here. You might notice but the agency's award. This is a hazard mapping program award. So Kevin Hauk is sitting in the back. He and his section deserve a lot of kudos for that. It's the Colorado Hazard Mapping Program champ. So this is for the post-flood risk analysis for Colorado. If you recall those September 2013 floods, I think we all recall them. The 4-year flood anniversary, we did a press release in September. It was picked up on a bunch of news outlets, and we got a lot of good coverage from that. DNR did that press release, so thank you to DNR. We're looking to wrap up this program prior to the 5-year anniversary. So just know that that's something that we're working very diligently on within CWCB, and the flood section has been working extremely hard, and we have 2 temporary staff that are working, and hopefully we'll be able to finish this all up. Another note, since our last board meeting, that Minute 323 was officially signed on September 27th. So confirmed signing with representatives both internationally and from the United States. So that's big news, and you'll hear more about that in executive session. Also, on October 18th through the 20th, I got to attend with Carly Brown my first Western States Water Council meeting. It was very interesting. It was in Albuquerque, so that was enjoyable to say the least. But I wanted to make sure that you all heard that we passed a policy position supporting prompt reauthorization of the Farm Bill. And if you're aware of the Farm Bill, it really has a lot of focus on conservation programs. So the Colorado River Basin Salinity Program is supported through that. And so that was something I was very happy about. Also, you may notice in front of you just the board members. It's a draft, so it's not out for the public at this point, but this is a draft of our water plan implementation update. So I'll do this. It is a draft, and you'll be hearing about it. I believe it's agenda item number 8 from Megan Holcomb, who's done the heavy lift on this. But again, this was a full staff event, and everyone participated. And so what you see in front of you is really the status of what's happened thus far. And we're going to use looking to the past to look to the future and really see how we move forward with our strategic plan on implementation. So I think it was important to really look and see what progress has been made over the last 2 years and how that progress was made, and what we still need to be doing based on the goals and actions throughout the water plan. That being said, this last month especially has been amazing for me with the staff at CWCB, and I just wanted to thank them, because pushing this out was really difficult. And so it wouldn't have been possible without the staff at CWCB, and they're so very amazing, and you guys are lucky to have them. And that's it for me.
Questions for Director Mitchell? Before we leave this topic, I would like to ask the board to join me in a round of applause to Kevin and the flood control section. Excellent work. Excellent. Move to the state engineer, Mr. Kevin Ryan. Good morning.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to start by congratulating Lauren and myself, and I appreciate the updates on all the staff. I'd like to just step in between Director Randall and Director Mitchell and just say, at the State Engineer's Office, we had the privilege of working with her before, and we get to continue that. So I'm just happy for her. It's just a great thing for us to have Lauren still working with us. I'm going to start with just one quick comment on the Republican River and rulemaking that I've updated you about in the past. You recall that we've had an effort to do rulemaking, and that got put on hold as we needed to address some issues on enforcement out there that would require legislation. And so both of those have been put on hold. We haven't quite been able to address that yet. There is currently more discussion on the inconsistency we had with the boundaries of the district out there and the model domain. There was a discussion on that last year. That discussion continues this year. I think my real update for you is that we hope that some of the dust settles on all that in the next couple months, and we'll be heading in one direction again, just to bring some good direction, consistency, and administration, consistent with compact and consistent with the designated basin rules out there. So I would hope that maybe at the next meeting we'll have a more firm direction on what's happening out there. Also want to let you know that during the last 6 weeks or so, I've gone around the state to each of our division's fall meetings. And so this is a little bit of a representation of you folks on the board and what's happening in your divisions. But it's a great opportunity for our leadership in Denver to get out to the division offices at a time when all of their staff is in the office, the water commissioners, and you hear what really happens, excuse me, hear what really happens out there, what's going on. So often I update you on the big items, the rulemakings and the compacts, but you know, there are a lot of little things that I just like to take a minute to go around the state on some of those little things. And now my mic is on, I apologize for that. Update you on some of those little things around the state. And you know, the last meeting we were at was Division 1, the South Platte. And in the South Platte Basin, we have so many augmentation plans and so many changes of water rights, and they all require very comprehensive and sophisticated accounting to do the administration. So that is a big part of their work up there, that they keep track of all that accounting, do all that accounting for diversions, replacements, and augmentation plans. A lot of work for them. I also want to point out that gravel pits are a large issue for Division 1 along the South Platte, certainly from Brighton or from the north end of Denver on up to Greeley, a lot of gravel mining. And it reminds me that we do see pending legislation this year on gravel pit substitute water supply plans that gives a little bit more latitude in the way the state engineer can address depletions in gravel, sand and gravel mining, that I think is appears to be helpful legislation. High groundwater continues to be a concern in a few acute areas in Division 1. We continue, Director Stolp has put his heart and soul into convening a technical group that works so hard to address those issues. Division 2, I spent a couple days last week with Director Goebel and Brent Newman and some others drinking through a fire hose on the Arkansas River Compact Administration for an upcoming meeting. It's just so important to understand how much of what goes on in Division 2 administration is influenced by compact administration in Division 2. Just also continued success. Again, this is something Director Goebel is familiar with, continued success with the fouling leasing pilot project. But one more of those things in Arkansas River Basin, just a lot of work directed toward dealing with grow facilities and water supply issues, including the use of wells. Division 3, I update you on the upcoming trial on the rules. They're always working on compact management. They have issues with idle wells in Division 3 in the basin that people would like to start up and use again for, among other things, grow facilities. And that's certainly a lot of discussion for them that they continue to work on. Division 4, it always strikes me the varied terrain and uses in Division 4 when you go from Crested Butte to the Paradox Valley and the other direction from Uray to the confluence with the Colorado River. They have a lot of work, a lot of administration work that they do with just the small users, the small ditches, all the way from the Grand Mesa, again, down to the Uncompahgre. So they have a lot of attention they have to spend on that. Division 5, as Director Stolp just mentioned, we had a discussion yesterday on shepherding water, and that seems, even though that discussion affects 4 water divisions on the West Slope, it seems to be centered right now, a lot of the discussion in the Colorado. And so they're dealing with that in conservation efforts and having those discussions. Division 6, continued attention to administration and helping water users see the value and having measuring devices and good records, especially as we're coming up on a decennial abandonment period or time, and make sure those water users have good records to really help protect them. That's something that's, of course, relevant in all the water divisions. And Division 7, just one of those little items like exempt wells. It's so interesting that exempt wells seem to be a small afterthought in so much of what we do, but it's just present in all our divisions. So they're working on that right now. So that was my trip around the state. It's just, again, really enjoyable to spend that time in the division offices. The last thing I'll mention, just a nod to one of our retiring employees, Garrett Jackson, from our dam safety unit. I often like to talk about the dam safety group we have at DWR and what a premier group they are, really nationwide. And Garrett Jackson, working out of Division 5, will be retiring or is just retiring right now. I'd just like to publicly say thanks to him for his great work for DWR. And Mr. Chair, that is my report.
Questions for Kevin? Thanks, great report. Let's move to Colorado Parks and Wildlife. Jackie Corday, good morning.
Mike.
Good morning, everyone. I'm sitting in this morning for Director Broscheid. Today is Colorado Parks and Wildlife's leadership team meeting, day 1. We all meet just the day before the commission meets, and the commission meets tomorrow and Friday. So that's where he is today in Yuma. I took a look at the dates for CWCB into 2018 and compared them to PWC's meeting dates to see if we had conflicts. And fortunately, there's only one next year, which is in November. So that's great. He should be able to attend on a more regular basis when you don't have the conflict there. So last week, one of our PWC commissioners inquired about how is CPW involved in the stream management plans? And we were able to respond to him, letting him know that our regional water specialists are plugged into working with the basin roundtables on those plans as they continue to come forth. Want to also mention our staff is also plugged into the SWASI update. Then I wanted to give you an ANS update. Some good news on this. The bill passed. The bill is called it's the Muscle Free Colorado Act. It passed out of the Interim Water Resources Review Committee for a vote. So that was really great news, with 9 members choosing to co-sponsor the bill. So we have super strong support, and it'll be introduced to the House on day 1 of the session. And just a couple of highlights of how the funding is going to work. The bill will require an additional $25 aquatic nuisance species stamp for in-state boaters and a $50 stamp for out-of-state boaters. This will generate $2.4 million approximately for the inspection stations and outreach program. There also will be increases for penalties for unlawful boat launches without inspection, and increase in penalties for knowing importation of ANS into the state. And so those funds will also go into the same pot of money to fund this program. The other thing I wanted to update you on, how many of you know about the River Watch program? Have you generally heard about that program? Okay, this is a program, the person who's in charge of it is under me in the water resources section. Her name is Barb Horn. And She and other folks created this program 25 years ago. And the main part of the program is that volunteers, mainly school teachers and their students from all over the state, collect hundreds of water samples every month to help establish and continue to monitor the baseline health of our rivers. So there's many different parameters that they're collecting water data on. This helps the Colorado Department of Health and Environment because their staff cannot get out once a month to do this type of sampling. Sometimes they can only do it once to twice a year. So this baseline information is very helpful and shared with the health department. So I just wanted to let you know about that. We are really working on water quality at CPW as well as water quantity issues. And then lastly, Jay Skinner provided me with a bunch of updates about what's on the agenda today. A lot of different things that he is here to help support. He mentioned items in agenda item number 11. There's 6 segments that CPW worked on and is supporting. And then also he wanted to mention agenda item number 12. We're supportive of the Water Trust's acquisition pilot program. And so he'll be here throughout all of these different agenda items to provide any answers or questions that you might have about those. And that's my report.
Questions for Jackie? Oh, Dr. Stolp.
Jackie, I have one question on the sticker, whatever. Do you get that at the same time you re-register your boat?
I imagine that's how it would work.
Separate place or anything?
No, I imagine that's how it would work, but I could find that out and get back to you on that.
Further questions for Jackie? Great, thank you. Let's move to Water Resources and Power Development Authority, Mr. Mike Brode.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Is this working? I want to make sure I start off with the microphone working. Thank you for having me here this morning. Just a few items to mention. We're currently working on our project eligibility list. You know, every year we do a survey of water and wastewater projects around the state, and we're still compiling that. But right now the numbers look something on the order in total of approximately 800 projects for in excess of $15 billion of need, demonstrated need out there. So every time we talk about the water plan and the 20 billion, remember to add on these 2 project eligibility lists. So that number continues to grow. And we'll be working on our joint resolution through the legislature that we do every year. Something of note, we're actually closing a bond issue this morning, of which those funds will help fund a portion of a $58 million loan that is also closing today for the town of Breckenridge for a new drinking water treatment plant. I'm happy to say the town was really happy because the loan rate that they'll receive after the closing today is 1.89% for a slightly over 20-year loan. So if you have to borrow, now's the time to borrow. And project costs are skyrocketing. It's tough to get contractors. If you look at all the cranes around Denver, you can see why. Something else I wanted to mention, I haven't talked about it in quite a while, and that's the Long Hollow Reservoir Project, also known as Bobby K. Taylor Reservoir. This last summer, earlier in the summer, we got to 3,000 acre feet of storage. Now that reservoir is projected to hold about 5,300 acre feet, but that's a really dry basin. As many of you know, the La Plata River Basin is pretty dry, and for us to get that to that level was pretty exciting. And we actually have almost 1,000 acre feet of carryover storage. So that's exciting. And the reason I bring that up, because I want to thank the CWCB board again, because, and this is maybe news to the new directors, but the CWCB contributed almost $1.6 million to the project, as well as our neighbors, the Ute Mountain Ute Tribe, received $3 million that they contributed from the resource funds from the AOP project. Southwestern Water Conservation District also contributed $100,000. And I think to date, the authority has put in $22 to $23 million. So it's an important project for compact compliance. in that La Plata River Basin with New Mexico. So I want to say thanks again, and we hope to be wrapping that project up pretty soon in the near future. So on to legislative matters. Again, I mentioned that joint resolution process that we do every year. We'll be working on that. But we also have a bill. It's not that often that the authority runs a bill to change our statute. We need modifications to 2 sections of our bill because there's been changes to the federal acts. The Clean Water Act and the Safe Drinking Water Act have been modified. Well, Safe Drinking Water Act always allowed for a 30-year term, but Clean Water Act has been modified. So for us to be able to make 30-year loans, we have to modify our statute. And the language basically says as permitted by those 2 acts in terms of loan terms. We did go before the Water Resources Review Committee. I had asked them to sponsor the bill, and our vote wasn't 10-0, it was 7-3. So you have to get 2/3 majority to get the committee to sponsor the bill. So by 1 vote, but it's classified as Bill E, I believe, if you look on the website. But I would ask for the CWCB support so that we can make loans under those state revolving fund programs as allowed by the federal act. And that means 30-year terms, which you guys are used to. You can make 30-year loans. So so down the road, if there's an opportunity for you guys to provide support, we'd certainly accept that and be happy to have it. And I think with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Questions for Mike? I don't believe so. Thanks.
Okay, thank you
Appreciate
very
it.
much, guys.
Thank you.
And congratulations, Ms. Riss.
All right, you'll see that we have an agenda change. Number 6 was going to be moved. We are scheduled for a break, but before that, we have a member of the public that would like to speak to us.
We can wait until that. He's speaking on that. We can wait until projects. He's speaking on the projects bill. Do we want to let
Yes.
him go now?
Yeah.
I'm okay with it.
All right.
Yeah.
Would you like to address the board, Mr. Michael? Right, but number 6 got moved. So right. And if you would like to comment on, I believe you're the only person here today for a comment. So if you would like to do that now before we get into that. And if you would identify yourself, if you would, please. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you for your interest in my input here today. My name is Jeff Michael. I'm a resident of Lake County, Colorado. I'm a public correspondent and representative of water users in the Upper Arkansas and Colorado River Basin. The engineering and release of nanoparticles into the environment has emerged as a current topic of scientific interest. Presently, the most widely dispersed is the silver nanoparticle. It has become the subject of extensive scientific studies concerning public health. A citizen review of the studies has concluded the scientific information used to permit weather modification programs is inadequate. For the sake of brevity and impact, I bring to you the findings and references of one study funded by the United States Air Force, which is just a glimpse of the information available. I quote, "An increasing number of studies have now shown the potential toxic effect of these compounds for human health. Studies have reported the in vitro effects of silver nanoparticulates on a variety of somatic cell lines, and in studies have reported the in vitro effects of silver nanoparticles. The in vivo investigations also demonstrated damages to the lung, brain, and liver tissues. In addition, silver nanoparticles might be a concern for reproductive health because nanoparticles also reach the testes after systemic administration or inhalation. And toxicity to Leydig cells has been reported. Toxicants that impair normal reproductive functions are an important health issue." End quote. When unperceived pollutants affect human health, the public looks to elected and appointed officials for guidance and accountability. We rely on you to make educated decisions relating to our environment. This does not appear to be the case when it comes to funding cloud seeding operations with taxpayer dollars. The time has come for a new era of representative transparency and accountability. I am here to shed light. I have garnered the information. Public outreach is occurring based on my following opinion. Citizens and tourists, we are being bombarded with silver iodide nanoparticles falling from the sky, aka cloud seeding. Scrubber-free, heavy metal pesticide incinerators located upwind of target areas. Water conservation programs fund flare sites and aerial dispersal, serving the Colorado Rockies to fill our slopes and reservoirs. Ski resorts, Colorado State, and out-of-state water entities are funding a priority pollutant deposited on wilderness, ranches, backyards, and humans. Industrial snow is falling in Colorado, permitted for another 5 years. Rebecca Mitchell and Joe Busto, please explain public hearing lack of notification to Eagle County residents. Incinerators fired November 1st, beginning seeding season. The reactions taking place in the sky, silver iodide nanoparticles exposed to sunlight turn bluish gray. Modified clouds are the result of billions of collisions taking place between propane-fired acetone bath AGI nanoparticles and H2O vapor. The resulting supercooled droplet explosions forming the metallic cloud. Interesting in a lab, not in our sky. The combined target area encompasses nearly half the state, with current plans to dramatically increase the scope over the next decade. The true cost to humans and our environment is becoming known. A simple review of AGI reveals the true nature of this metallic compound. Toxic to aquatic life. Nanoparticles target the brain, testes, and liver, crossing the blood-brain barrier, moving throughout the body. Know the snow. The executive director's determination that the project, quote, does not involve a high risk of harm to land, people, health, safety, property, or the environment is incorrect. I call for an immediate cessation of all releases of silver iodide nanoparticle aerosols into the Colorado environment, given the dramatic evidence presented and available from the scientific community. Rebecca Mitchell, it's time to emerge from the shadows and fully disclose the details of your toxic program to conserve water. The continuation of this activity from this point on will be considered illegal. The scientific evidence has proven beyond a doubt that the risks outweigh the perceived benefits. Thank you for your time.
Director McLeod.
Can you provide us with the scientific data that you're quoting?
Absolutely. Thank you. At this point in time, we were scheduled for a break, but we are running ahead of schedule. Let's go ahead and do agenda item number 7, and then we will take our scheduled break. Morning, Kirk.
Good morning, Kirk Russell, Finance Section Chief. Let's see if I can fit my notebook on this. We need a bigger table here. All right, this is agenda item 7A. And I will be speaking on 7A, 7B, and 7C. And I want to echo Becky's welcome to Rachel Pettinger. She will be replacing Derek Johnson, who left back in June. And we're excited. She brings a lot of experience. And she's seeing a lot of the projects already that are going to be coming in January's board meeting. So she'll be presenting at that time. Well, I was going to say we've only got about 20 minutes. When we originally set up the projects bill discussion, we weren't positive that Chatfield needed to be presented, and that was kind of a late ad, so I'm glad we're running ahead of schedule. This particular item, 7A through 7C, has the non-reimbursable funding items, and in particular 7A are the items that were identified to the board in the Finance Committee meeting in September. We went back. I think there was a favorable opinion of most all of those items. We did make a slight adjustment to the weather modification item, but I think the rest of them were as presented at the Finance Committee. So I wasn't going to spend a lot of time on those items other than just to make available to the board an opportunity to bring any of them up if any changes have been made. But in general, I wanted to highlight a couple of them that maybe needed some additional information in the public and why we're doing it the way we are. Agenda item that number 2 under 7A is the litigation fund. And to explain how that fund works, the Attorney General's office comes to the board in May requesting approval of the expenditures that they anticipate through the end of the year, which would be May through June, and then the projection for the following year. And each year we try to analyze about how much is needed in order to cover those expenses. And we decided that it was just better to call it a $2 million fund that's set up, and we will refresh that whatever's needed each year. And hopefully that is enough to take care of those litigation activities. But the board does have the opportunity to review the activities each May. I wanted to talk about number 3, which is the feasibility study grant fund. That we refreshed that last year by $200,000, I think. And what we found is through this water plan effort, the grant effort, we found an opportunity to push some of those projects into this feasibility study grant program. Because the water plan, some of those larger projects, we require a feasibility study. So it was, you know what, you're not ready for a water plan grant yet. Let's get some additional funds available into the project to get them to where we can make a decision for a water plan grant. So Anna has indicated a significant increase in those and accessing those funds. So we're going to push that up to $500,000 for next year with a focus on storage. That's really one of our main interests with that fund. The item number 7, the Arkansas DSS is a continuation, and that is, I think we're funded up to about $3 million for that. So this $500,000, I think, is supposed to take care of the costs anticipated going forward. Let's see, did I skip over? Yeah, I skipped over the weather modification program. The staff presented a request for $500,000 at the Finance Committee, and I know the committee reviewed that, and there was some uncertainty whether the ask should be as high as $500,000 or if we should return it to the $175,000. And I think through a lot of debate, both at the staff level, it was determined that it was just best to keep that at $175,000 for this year. And I believe that's all I wanted to summarize from our Finance Committee meeting, and I'll take any questions. And I know Joe Busto wouldn't mind responding to that last speaker if the opportunity lends itself.
All right, thank you, Kirk. Question? Yes. Questions for Kirk on what we just finished, items 1 through 12? I don't believe so. Joe, would you like to speak at this time on agenda item number 6?
Thank you.
Russell again, just a reminder that we have batched these together in a block, and so we just need one motion for approval for agenda items 7A 1 through 12. If the board is comfortable with the funding levels, the projects are recommended.
Director Gallagher.
Mr. Chairman, I would move approval of staff's recommendation for funding of 7A 1 through 12.
Been moved by Director Gallagher, second by Director McLeod to move staff recommendation, agenda item 7A through subsection 1 through 12. Further discussion? Call for the vote. All those in favor signify by an aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Russell, Finance Section Chief, agenda item 7B. It's a continuation of projects bill discussion, and this $5 million for this year's projects bill that has been identified over a year and a half ago when we received the prepayment from Aurora, and it was about $70 million, and we at the time, we were trying to figure out how to $25 particular request from the board is the second $25 million chunk, and we've learned a lot over the last year and how that $25 million needed to get moved through the process. And a reminder to the board, it's a 10-5-10. The first 10 that I speak of is the $10 million that goes to supplement the low funding that was coming through severance tax by way of Tier 2 funding to the Basin Roundtable efforts, the WSRF fund. And I understand that that money from last year's bill has moved into the fund, and each individual basins have received their portion. We distributed that, as I understand, based on the original allotment that was created for severance tax originally. So it's a 40-30-30 based on the calendar, and then the distribution and percentage-wise from there. The $5 million is for watershed restoration, and I received a walk-by comment from Chris Sturm the other day, and he said that the applications for watershed restoration grants is up around $5 million, which lines up real nice with the appropriation of $5 million in last year's projects bill. So I'm sure he's excited and yet worried about the workload that I'm sure that is going to create in his efforts. And then the last $10 million is the $10 million water plan grant effort that you guys have been listening to us talk about for the last couple of board meetings. And this board meeting or tomorrow we'll hear the final approval for several of them. I want to say those numbers are $3.5 million in recommended approval tomorrow for water plan grants, and then another $3 million in supported projects that will then be final approval in January. So of that $9 million, we're looking at supporting about 6.5 already by January's meeting. And so this particular request is that the board provide a approval of the second installment of $25 million for that implementation. I will, and as I noted in my memo, we have seen an impact to the revenue from severance tax as a result of refunds the first part of this fiscal year. The original projection for severance tax or the 25% portion of severance tax was around $38 million, which is about average for, or what I've seen over the last 5 to 8 years. And so we were moving forward with the assumptions that it was going to be an average year, and then the revenues, the receipts that came in, they were significantly less. Matter of fact, the first one was only $1 million for the first month, and if you project that out for 12 months, that doesn't come anywhere near $38 million. And so we looked into it, and it appears that there's a lot of refunds that are being extracted from those revenues as they're coming in. And so as I understand it, for the first 3 or 4 months, we may only see that $1 million receipt. So I think it is going to be a low distribution of severance tax revenue throughout this year, which, and I bring this up primarily because I want to caution the board and those that you speak to about this water plan grant funding. This last $25 million that'll be next year, I think there's a question whether we're going to be able to fund that at the full $25 million, and whether that's distributed, a portion of the 10-5-10, or we eliminate one of those pieces. That'll be, I think, some conversation we'll have over the next year, and a final decision or a final recommendation at the Finance Committee next year, and a board decision at this time next year. So with that, I will accept any questions for the water plan $25 million recommendation for projects bill.
Questions for Kirk? Director Randall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Kirk, thanks for that. I was actually going to ask you to address severance tax projections. I'll just share with the board, Kirk is absolutely accurate that we saw abnormally large refunds in the first 3 years of the first 3 months of the fiscal year. And as of the end of September, net receipts into severance tax were about $200,000 after the $1 million net in the first month, and then the third month had significant refunds. And so the September forecast, on which most projections are currently based, didn't take those into account. That was based on July receipts. We'll have another forecast in about a month's time on December 20th, and that's just the quarterly forecast. But the best numbers that we have to go on are the September forecast, informed by month-to-month information on receipts. So that's all kind of a long wind-up to a question, which is, based on the September forecast, which again, I will, bet money I don't have that it's overly rosy, given what we've seen over the last couple of months. But just based on the September forecast, what was the funding level predicted for Tier 2 programs? Do you have that figure? I just don't. What I'm getting at is, Water Supply Reserve Fund is authorized at a certain amount, but based on the September forecast, what do we think? What did we think based on that it's likely to receive next year?
We were led to believe that based on that high forecast, that the Tier 2 WSRF program was going to receive 20 to 30% of normal. And I shouldn't say normal, that's probably not a corrector.
Of authorized.
Of the authorized 10 million, I think. And so in my mind, as I viewed it, 10 million was being supplemented from the construction fund, and there would be another 2 to 3 million, maybe even 3.5 million if it was rosy. So the roundtables would have enjoyed a higher than normal, or higher than provided in a $10 million fashion. So that is, it's hard to tell. I'm not positive how the Tier 2 revenue flows timing wise. I don't know if they're still feeling some of last year's revenue receipts in the Tier 2 program. So some of that might trickle in yet from last year. So I'm not quite sure the timing.
No, I think that's right. I think it's distributed proportionally in 3 installments, more at the beginning and less at the end. And so I don't know actually how much is going to flow in the later installments for the current fiscal year. But that's helpful. So that's the answer I was actually looking for. Thank you for that. I might just note for the board's information that the governor's proposed budget, which was submitted on November 1st, did not include any severance tax transfers, partially in light of the fact that revenues are, we believe, going to be lower than anticipated. But in the past, to balance the general fund and other things, the governor's budget has proposed transfers out of severance tax, but not this year.
Director Hawkins.
Kirk, is there any way we could get a briefing at some point before next year's Finance Committee meeting on what we can anticipate as far as the refunds and when they will be hitting the severance tax fund?
That's a good question. I know that in the past, I think it's even in the January board meeting, because it's in Denver, we've had Bill Levine come speak about maybe what the projections are and what's on the horizon. And I think there's value to that. So maybe if Director Randall would agree, we might invite Bill.
Sure, I think that'd be great. We need to recognize we're still trying to figure out what severance tax revenues are going to look like and what refunds. But certainly I could ask Bill to come maybe to the January meeting. We could also ask the Department of Revenue to give us a little bit of information on, you know, are there ways in which we can predict, just for our planning purposes as a board, are there ways we can predict those revenues and what refunds might be likely? So Director Hawkins, I think that's a good request, but we can work on it for January.
Any other questions for Kirk or Director Randall? Dr. Stolp.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to add to the confusion, Henry Sobonay, the budget director, also points out that the severance tax is the most difficult to predict of all revenue streams. And they almost invariably end up different than what the prediction is. And you don't really know until they come in because of the many nuances of rebates and how the oil and gas extraction industry report and what quarters they report and things like that. So it is very confusing. And so don't expect a clear glide path on this.
Other questions? I think we're ready for a recommendation, Kirk.
So I am recommending $25 million to be added to the projects bill, the 2018 projects bill for water plant implementation in the 10-5-10 proportions that they were last year.
Director Yon.
Move staff recommendation on item.
It's been moved by Director Yon, second by Director Gallagher to move staff recommendation 7B. Further discussion? Call for the vote. All those in favor signify by an aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Move to 7C, if you would, please.
Thank you. Kirk Russell, Finance Section Chief. That last conversation, I'm reminded of we regularly talk when we have the opportunity to the citizens of Colorado how difficult it is to plan for water projects when they're dependent on severance tax. That's not a good connection. Trying to budget out of that severance tax is so difficult, which to me, I think shines a light on the loan program, and it's the way we or this board operates that loan program, and that revenue comes in, and we then make loans that turn it into a steady return on that investment, and that attenuates those peaks and valleys. So I think it's just a great model. The last item under projects bill is agenda item 7C, and it's the Chatfield Reservoir reallocation. And I had Andrew hand out the paper copy of this. It was emailed to you as well. I apologize that this was late in the rallying efforts to get the board packets out the door. This one just didn't get the attention it needed, so I apologize for that. This particular item, and I've got hopefully Lauren Riss near. Lauren is the board member representing DNR on the Chatfield Mitigation Company board, and is very familiar with these details. And so she and I and Jonathan Hernandez, the project manager on the loans from the loan program towards this project, we get together regularly and other on the pieces that we're gear up. Dirt's going to fly here before winter, and that's all good news. But I guess the bad news is that the cost of the project has increased, and I tried to summarize these. Every time I try to summarize it, I realize I need to take a step higher, just because the project is way too complicated. So what I've summarized is the project is now a $171 million project, up from $134 million. Was originally when all the participants contracted for the project. And you can see a lot of that increase is in that the recreation mitigation effort. A significant portion of that could be attributed to the marina and the efforts on the marina. And then I think there's still a significant amount of increase in costs on the recreation side that are not completely connected to the marina. But nonetheless, the project has increased, and not only does that impact the borrowers that will be coming to you in January for a loan increase. I understand many of them will be asking for some additional funds. But the portion that CWCB owns in the project that we called orphan shares, the cost of those orphan shares goes up. We need to request the board to increase or to ask the legislature for an increase in the appropriation in what we can buy or afford in this project. And so page 2 shows the breakdown of all the project participants, of which CWCB is about 33%. And I tried to summarize, back 4 years when this was pulled together, there was so much uncertainty. I tried to summarize in table 3 why the request for about $8 million, and it's a combination of obviously the increase in cost. The original estimates on our operations and maintenance on the portion of the project that we own was quite high, and since that time we've started to contract with some buyers of what we own. We're also in communication with a couple other folks that are interested. Operation and maintenance costs on our behalf in order to have a placeholder to buy multiple years of shares. So all that wrapped up into some reduction in O&M costs. At the same time, I've thrown in a contingency of about $6 million, and part of the issue is timing. We need to get into the projects bill, which requires this board's approval. At the same time, the participants are being asked to go back to their board to figure out if they want to continue to participate in the project. We've used the term, they have an off-ramp. Preliminary indications are that those participants are going to continue forward, but there may be a participant or two that says, we really only have this much money. Unfortunately, the price went up. Now we can afford less shares. Well, when that happens, those relinquished shares are now called orphan shares, and we adopt orphan shares. And so that needs to be part of this request to go back to the projects bill to make sure we have enough money to capture those orphan shares to make sure the project continues. And so that the $8 million includes a contingency that I'm comfortable will protect us from that trouble I just described. So with that, Lauren, do you have anything you want to add, or if there are any questions for Lauren? My recommendation is to request the legislature for an $8 million increase in the appropriation from $62 million to $70 million to continue this project.
Questions for Kirk? I have one actually for Lauren. On the construction management, is that correlated back to the recreation mitigation part of it, or is that just kind of lumped all together with everything in construction management?
Yeah, so the recreation item is separate from construction management, and I might ask Kirk to remind me what all is included in the construction management category, but those are distinct.
Yeah, I think the difficulty is the construction management takes care of all of those items. It's kind of the overall effort of the construction activities and the management of all those multiple contracts, and also some of the observation work, maybe some of the continuation of some design support activities as well. But it's for the overall project, not for a particular category.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and I was just going to offer one more clarification, and that is that this $171 million is still an estimate. If there's one thing we know for sure about this project, it's that at the end it won't be $171 million. The numbers have bounced around considerably over the last couple of months, and this is the latest and greatest estimate that we have for what the project costs will be. But because of the various agreements that Kirk alluded to, we're required to fund the escrow account at this new estimate. And so that's why we're coming to you here at this point.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'm just kind of curious because the construction management is really increased much more than what other components of the project have. So, okay, thank you. Any further questions?
Director Wattenberg, let me add something to that. I'm not sure that that item was broke out originally in the same fashion it was today. I think the refinement of estimates has caused them to identify some pieces that are needed that maybe were part of a global number before, and I think that could be part of the reason that looks like such a significant increase. But I do believe there is also some added costs that maybe were unknown at the time related to this. So I think it's a combination of both.
Okay, thank you, Kirk. Thank you, Lauren. Staff recommendation, I believe. Director Yon.
I would move staff recommendation on item 7C.
Been moved by Director Yon, second by Director Dutton to move staff recommendation 7C. Further discussion? Call for the vote. All those in favor signify by an aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Yeah, let's take about a 15-minute break now, and we will reconvene at 10:05. Thank you, Director Mitchell. To continue with agenda item number 8. Good morning.
Gotta put it on. Yeah, it's gotta get close.
Testing. Better. Okay. So November 19th, 2015, the CWCB delivered Colorado's water plan to the board in the Colorado Governor's office. So we are just 4 days away from that 2-year anniversary. And we're continuing to lay the groundwork for the next phase in Colorado water policy. Many Thank you. When developing this structure for this report, we continually referred back to all of when we were every formatting progress. So after the 2 introduction pages, the structure of this report follows the structure of Colorado's water plan chapters. As a reminder to the board, staff, and public here today, chapters 2 through 5 of the water plan focused on those foundational elements that guide Colorado water management. And so we're not rehashed in this update report. Everyone is going to read it from front to back. Considering this is only our 2-year anniversary, we struggled on how to best represent statewide progress on those big 2030 and 2050 measurable objectives. We recognize that few actions in the plan relate directly to those big sky numbers, such as 400,000 acre feet, 80% of Coloradans, et cetera. So this dashboard that's at the bottom of this page was born out of the necessity to show just how quickly we're moving as a state on those tangible actions. And those actions are the foundation for implementation. It also just represents a break in some of that text, pulling together some quotes from our board, from the staff on progress so far. So since you just got this morning, it's really hot off the press. We really want to give the board time to review and comment over the next 2 weeks. We would like to get this document out or posted on our website at the beginning of December. So we really welcome any comments, edits that you find, and look forward to incorporating those changes. If you have any questions at all, feel free to contact me. You can ask me right now or after you've had more of a chance to read through.
Director Maslow.
Director Gallagher and I would like to replace our photos with something more complimentary.
Check. We can do that.
No.
Other comments? Well, I would like to be the first in a long line of many is congratulate you and Director Mitchell and the rest of the staff. Excellent, excellent work. This is really nice. And it just, every time it amazes me how far we've come in just a short period of time. So again, thank you very much.
Fantastic.
Wonderful. Any other questions for Megan at this time? I don't think so. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, let's move to agenda item number 9.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Craig Gabu, CWCB staff for the record. I'll be presenting agenda items 9A and 9B. This is agenda item 9A, and it is an action item. Can you hear? Good? Okay. Thank you. The grant request before you today, South Platte River ATM and Conservation Easement, is a request by Colorado Open Lands in coordination with the Western Water Partnership to assist in funding the conservation of a working farm through the creation of a conservation easement and a water sharing agreement between the landowner and a municipality. These efforts will implement an ATM pilot project providing for the perpetual protection of irrigated farmland and the perpetual use and ownership of interruptible water supplies by a participating M&I water provider. Conservation easements can provide the permanence and enforceability to give all parties comfort that a leasing structure can remain in place, but the water rights can never be separated from the property. Over the last year, Colorado Open Lands has been working to draft due diligence guidelines and conservation easement language regarding water rights to accommodate for the use of water off the property, whether for municipal or environmental uses. After significant conversations between Colorado Open Lands and the Natural Resource Conservation Service, the service is willing to consider federal funding for a pilot conservation easement that would utilize this language and permit limited water leasing to municipalities. The project is a proposed conservation easement on a highly productive farm in eastern Weld County. Staff supports Colorado Open Lands efforts based on the need to execute additional alternative water transfer agreements, the involvement of the Natural Resources Conservation Service, and the successful track record of the proposed consulting team assembled. And when successful, this effort will further Colorado Water Plan's measurable objectives and critical goals and actions. No issues or additional needs have been identified. If approved, I will be CWCB's project manager. The applicant is providing over $1 million in match and is requesting $284,500 from the ATM grant program, and staff recommends approval. Carmen Farmer, Conservation Project Manager from Colorado Open Lands, and Todd Doherty from Western Water Partnerships are both in attendance, and we're all available to take questions and address your concerns. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Craig. Any, Director Dutton?
I just wanted to say that I think this is a really, really neat project, and I was really excited about the opportunity that the team has outlined and just really exploring the ability to protect land and water while also adding flexibility, because we're really going to need that flexibility. And so I really look forward to reading the final report, and thank you guys for being here.
Further questions for Craig? Director Young.
I just want to say this is right in near my area. And I just want to thank Colorado Open Lands. You know, they've been kind of on the cutting edge of doing these things and incorporating the flexibility, as Director Dutton said, into conservation easements. And so that's to make the water plan work. This is one of the things that's going to happen. If you really want to protect agriculture into the future, the only way to ensure that it happens is through conservation easements. Otherwise, a municipality could come later and buy up the land eventually. So if you do these leases, and this keeps the land and the water in the ownership of agriculture. And so, you know, these kind of things are a great thing for our area. And long ago, I did a conservation easement with Colorado Open Lands, so I'm kind of biased towards them, but they've always they've been very good to work with. And in my conservation easement, we had similar language because under the North Sterling Irrigation District, we already had a lease with XL Energy, so they were flexible enough to allow, you know, up to 30% of my water to go to another use, if that ever happens in a greater amount than our XL Energy agreement. So with that, and with also just the other funding that has come in, you have NRCS and you have the Walton Family Foundation, all of that, along with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, all that coupled together. I think this is a great opportunity for the Colorado Water Conservation Board to be part of something like this.
Thank you, Director Yon. Further questions for Craig? Carmen, Todd, would you like to speak?
Good morning. I'm Carmen Farmer with Colorado Open Lands. Again, we thank you for letting us come today. As Mr. Yon pointed out, for us, this stemmed out of some of our traditional conservation easement work, but we saw the opportunity for it to be a catalyst. Really, with all the other funders, this would be the first time we've got federal funding from NRCS that would permit some water sharing. And so we think this is an opportunity, one, for the South Platte Basin, but also amongst other basins where we can take the lessons learned from this and apply them elsewhere. And so I don't really have anything else to add. Todd?
Good morning, Todd Doherty for the record. And no, it's an honor to be here and be able to be working with Colorado Open Lands on this. One thing I'd like to add, Jim, you alluded to it, which is Colorado Open Lands and really the land conservation community in general, by bringing in this other industry that hasn't necessarily worked with the water industry and be able to leverage the efforts and resources. I think hopefully we can water industry and the land conservation community that the respective goals. So I think that's just something that I'm excited that's happening right now. I'm just here for questions, and I appreciate it.
Questions for Carmen or Todd? Director Yon.
I just also wanted to point out that, you know, this is part of our water plan goal, 50,000 acre feet by 2030. So this is progress toward that water plan goal. So this is good. And the only other thing is, you know, I was speaking one time on a panel on the western slope, and we were talking about transbasin diversions, and you know, I was making the point that any transbasin diversions could help protect agriculture on the South Platte Basin. And someone said, well, what would keep someone from, or a municipality from, coming later and buying up that land? And I said, nothing. And they were all shocked that I would admit that, but that's true. But this is something that you can point to that says this does protect agriculture. And does allow flexibility. So I think it's a great project. So with that, I would move staff recommendation on item, whatever item this is, sorry. I got too engrossed.
9A.
On item 9A, thank you.
All right, first of all, thank you, Carmen and Todd, for being here today. It has been moved by Director Yon to move agenda item 9A, second by Director Goebel. Is there any further discussion? I'll call for the vote. All those in favor signify by an aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. We'll move on to agenda item 9B. It is also an action item. The request before you today is the new Cache Laputa water marketing strategy that proposes operating third party municipal water suppliers. The further management and monitoring the exact scale of the proposed water marketing strategy will be determined during the project, but the project team has identified municipalities who could benefit from entering lease agreements with new Cache. The expectation is that this project will, within 2 years, have developed functioning water sharing agreements that will eventually lead to the sharing of water in the range of 1,000 to 2,000 acre feet per year, and establish a strategy that will be in the future. New Cache wishes to develop the strategy to create more diversified income streams for its shareholders who remain primarily agricultural producers. The team's overall goal is to utilize the existing New Cache ditch system with its willing shareholders' water rights and existing legal mechanisms to provide temporary water supplies to meet non-agricultural water needs, and in the process, sustaining agriculture while temporarily sharing water with municipalities and other non-agricultural water users, supporting rural economic development, and helping wildlife habitat. The ATM grant will be used to support outreach and partnership building with municipal and industrial stakeholders to educate and encourage participation in a water market strategy and the use of available water market studies from Colorado and Western United States to structure a water market. Staff supports New Cache Laputa's irrigation company's efforts based on the project team's background and experience with ATMs and related studies. CWCB staff expects this effort has a high probability of success. With that success, this effort will further Colorado's water plan's measurable objectives and critical goals and actions with regard to ATMs. Staff will work cooperatively with the applicant to refine the budget to more directly align with the task identified in the statement of work. Otherwise, no issues or additional needs have been identified. If approved, I will be CWCB's project manager. The applicant is providing $200,000 in matching contributions and is requesting $214,957 from the ATM grant program, and staff recommends approval. Dale Trowbridge with the New Cache Laputa Irrigation Company and Greg Kernahan of Ducks Unlimited are both in attendance today, and we are all available to take questions or address any of your concerns. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Questions for Craig? Dale and Greg, would you like to speak? Good morning.
Thank you for having us here today. Thank you. My name is Dale Trowbridge. I'm the manager of the New Cache Laputa Irrigating Company. Our company is on the verge of change. The other ditch companies in our area have been hit a little harder than ours with municipal purchases, and so my board has directed me, and some of our stockholders are interested in what can we do to be proactive in this, and so this is an effort to try to do that, and so appreciate your consideration.
Good morning. My name is Greg Kernahan. Some of you may know I've been working on ATMs for several years now. Our last effort was the Flex model study, and through that effort, we were able to identify contracts and certain structures that may work. One of the things that we lacked in the past was really a water provider. And so with New Cache stepping up and really dedicating themselves to looking at new solutions, we think that we have a successful path forward to developing a water market. Thank you.
Questions for Dale or Greg? Well, thank you for being here this morning. Appreciate it. Director Yon.
I noticed you have your water quantified as far as consumptive use. Is that correct? But you don't have the water right changed yet?
We have not changed any water rates. No, it would be an effort to move in that direction. Correct.
And so are you looking at using the flex market where you change 50% of your water right for this flex type?
So yeah, so there's a number of different strategies for making water available. Interruptible supply plans would probably be our first step, but I think you're alluding to the Colorado Ag Water Protection Water Right, and that is certainly in the back of our mind. And I think some of the shareholders have expressed interest in that program. So we haven't dedicated ourselves to that or any of the shareholders, but it's certainly in the back of our mind as a strategy.
So just to make a comment towards that, but we went in to do, the North Sterling Irrigation District went in to change part of its, or actually we were going to change all of our water. And of course that's considered speculation to change all the water unless you have an end user. So had the Colorado Protection Water Right been in place, we probably would have changed up to 50% of our water. So that's just something that you might keep in mind, that you could use that piece of legislation to do that and keep 50% in agriculture and at least have that flexibility. And since you probably won't necessarily have a specific end user in mind for all of your changed waters, right? So you might just keep that in mind.
Further questions for Dale or Greg? Again, thank you for being here this morning. We have staff recommendation before us, I believe. Director Yon.
I would move staff recommendation on item 9B.
Moved by Director Yon on 9B, second by Director Dutton to move staff recommendation. Further discussion? All for the vote. All those in favor signify by an aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Chair, that concludes agenda item 9.
Thank you. Let's move to agenda item number 10. Good morning,
Right, agenda item number 10. It's Greg Johnson, Water Supply Planning Section, CWCB staff. This is the SWASI update, the Statewide Water Supply Initiative update. I should add, I was giving a brief talk a couple weeks ago on a panel with the Water Education Colorado. So that's a new name for Colorado Foundation for Water Education. And they had a rule that you couldn't use any acronyms in any of the presentations all day long, which I'll admit was extremely difficult. So I will do my best to follow that, but I thought it was fairly constructive. So today my goal is to really focus on the process of the update, where we are at, our current status, but not to go into too much of the detail on the methodologies themselves. Of course, we are happy to answer any questions. I do have Matt Lindberg with Brown and Caldwell, who is our main project manager for this whole update process, so we can help field any questions that you have at the end of this. This is a graphic that you've seen before. My apologies for the. Really wanted to illustrate that we are now closing up phase 1 of this project, which was the development of the methodology. So how we are going to do the analysis was quite a big discussion about how we're going to run the numbers, what the hydrologic modeling process looks like this time. As we've discussed, this is very, very different than previous statewide water supply initiative updates that we have done. This being the third time that we have done this. The direction that we were given was to use the DSS models, the decision support systems that the state has created and invested millions of dollars in for about 25 years now, to really use those statewide. Where we do not have models, we have other point flow models and things that we can use to piece things together. Models are being developed, for example, in the Arkansas basin, so we have other methods of doing that. But this is the first time we are doing an analysis with the hydrology statewide. As such, a lot of more work needed to go into determining exactly how we are doing that. So we And then the next steps there is a really important piece that I'm going to talk about as well, how this really feeds into the basin plans. That's really what the whole point of this analysis is, to provide tools and data for local roundtables to then update their basin plans. So the TAG process, technical advisory groups, were designed to as we could get in a strategic fashion. So it was a representative peer review process. We had representatives from each of the roundtables, many of our sister agencies at the state, a number of other nonprofits and folks who have been plugged in on the SWASI process, as well as the water plan process throughout the years. We had technical advisory groups for each of the 4 main categories. So for scenario planning, for municipal and self-supplied industrial, for the agricultural piece, and then finally for the environmental and recreational methodology. So now we are actually finalizing these methodologies based on the input we have received, and we are actually processing task orders to then step into that phase 2 to really begin the number crunching. We have 3 main firms, engineering firms, working on this. One of those task orders has already been approved. We're hopeful that the other 2 will get through the contracting process in the next month or so that we can really hit the ground running end of December, probably early January. So the technical advisory group process really kicked off in earnest in August. In early August, we had distributed the materials. So I would add, this graphic at the bottom here, kind of our timeline for how we developed this whole methodology. Drafts were developed prior to submittal, to the technical advisory groups, and a lot of work went into that. So we had workshops with internal staff as well as the whole technical team to really refine those methodologies as well as possible. We had walked through this process, prior in May as we were forming these technical advisory groups. In July with the board, we had walked through, more of the details on each of those different draft methods, each of those documents. So a lot of work went into it prior to sending those out in August, which I think went a long way towards, towards the comments that we received in the end. That that a lot of work was done. I think most of the participants in this process really appreciated that a lot of that heavy lifting was already done prior to things being distributed. We asked for comments in mid-September prior to having the meetings at the end of September, and then in October we really iterated with what those revisions were. So revising the document and then creating a comment and response matrix. So how we responded to every single comment that we received, similar to the water plan. And then in November, just last week, we had the final technical advisory group meetings. Quick summary of the comments that we received, just to count for each of those different categories, a total of 172 comments. A lot of those, as you can imagine, were multiple comments kind of in one paragraph that addressed multiple different things. So, a lot was really squeezed into those. Many substantive comments, many things that helped us to clarify the documentation that we had. Many comments on the details on how we were addressing, certain things. Some of those drivers, for example, municipal and industrial methodology has, gallons per capita per day, indoor versus outdoor for certain scenarios, and how we tweak those. So a lot of thought really went into this. And mostly I want to emphasize that, a huge thank you to everyone who participated in this. So we actually had 5 of our board members, our directors, participate in this, which was extremely helpful. And then, of course, all the other folks that I had mentioned. So Director Jan, Director Goebel, Director Dutton, and Director Wattenberg, as well as Director Stolp. So we really appreciate everyone being involved in this process. This is just a quick example of that comment response matrix. So we had a comment response table like this for each of those 4 different categories, where we went through what the comment was and then how we were responding to it. And what section, what category it applies to. We also have everything posted, of course, on our website. So there is a statewide water supply initiative update webpage that you can get to with all of these documents up there. So the main deliverables that we had prior to the meetings last week were those comment response tables, as well as the revised documentation. We just posted the clean version on the website. We do have red lines for how we actually change those documents. And then we have summary notes from those initial workshop meetings, along with all the other materials that were posted prior, which includes presentations that we had given at the initial workshops. So getting into the next steps, the document that we had just handed around is a draft of a fact sheet So one of the big things that we are really hoping to do is really step up the messaging on what this is, what it isn't, how it's very different the next time, and in the form of simple materials that we can get out to folks at the roundtables and other stakeholders. I think it's hard when you have a methodology document that's 20, 30 plus pages long for folks to really have the time to dive into those details. So we've been working with the technical team to draft these documents to really get that message out there. So concurrently, of course, we are making those final revisions to the documentation, based on the feedback that we received. Much of that was actually already done in advance of the meetings last week. And then, of course, we are stepping into phase 2 and actually, running the numbers, as I've said. That last bullet there, planning for basin plans, this is something that I just wanted to get on your radar. This is a huge piece, of course, of why we are doing this. And as we get into the analysis for each of these different categories, we are keeping an eye towards, what this means, what the data sets are going to be, how it's going to be useful. At the end of the day, next year, when we have a product and all these different tools, these different data sets, that those are meaningful for the roundtables, that this will feed directly into what they're doing on their basin implementation plan updates. So a big piece of that will be creating guidance for how that is done, what that assignment is with each of the roundtables. We will certainly be working very much this time around to improve the process. I think that the basin implementation plans were very successful, and all the basins really took that in a slightly different direction, of course, with the different issues in the basins, but did an excellent job on those. I think our main task this time around is to have a little more consistency, especially on the projects side of things, to make sure that we have the data that we need, the cost data, the acre feet, the yield numbers, that we can then use that for the next round of the Colorado Water Plan, so that we have the data that we need for funding, for example. So a lot of work will be going into that. I will be circling back with the board and of course with the roundtables on what that looks like and kind of what that assignment is exactly. So that's my quick update. Again, I'm happy to answer any questions on each of these different pieces. We certainly hope that that draft fact sheet, and again, we're still working on the refinements to that, but something like that will be very helpful to get the message out there. And then, of course, just want to give kudos again to Megan Holcomb on the anniversary report for the water plan. All of this stuff dovetails, of course. And so it's very helpful to have that document out there as well to really show how we're making progress in all of this.
Questions for Greg, Director Hawkins.
First of all, Greg, thank you for all of your work and your staff's work on the tag teams. I know it was a lot of work to put those discussions together. My question is about what sorts of revisions were made to the methodology since we've seen them last. Can you give us a broad overview of major changes that we saw coming out of those tag teams?
Sure. Great question. So I would say, to sum it up, most of those changes were actually fairly minor. By far, the biggest number of changes was to the municipal and self-supplied industrial methodology, and I do have a red line version of that we can send around. A lot of the changes really focused on clarifications, so really adding additional text in the documentation to better describe what we're doing. There were some discussions, especially on the agricultural methodology, that were really focused on better understanding the major difference that we have this time around of looking at the full diversion and the pros and cons of doing that. And so there's some language to that extent, helping with that description. Similarly, on the environmental and recreational piece, going into a little more detail on exactly what those tools are, the two tools being the non-consumptive needs assessment database that we're working with the technical team to design, as well as the flow tool. There were also a number of changes to the agricultural methodology based on the emerging technologies discussion. So we had a lot of discussion about scenario planning in general. I guess this is just an aside, kind of the pros and cons of scenario planning, and it is definitely not a sensitivity analysis. So one of the cons is that because you're looking at these very distinct scenarios, and in each of those scenarios you're changing different drivers, different levers, in some cases things wash out. So you move one thing up and another thing down, that that demand calculation may stay the same. So that, a lot of discussion around that piece, but that didn't necessarily get into, some of that went into the documentation to further describe that. But that was really just, I think, a helpful discussion for the TAG members to have. The agricultural piece had a fairly robust change to the emerging technologies consideration. So the original recommendation was to really focus on case studies for what we're calling emerging technologies. So things like irrigation improvements that we can't really even envision right now because it's obviously not a current technology. And the decision was made, instead of really just doing a case study, to be more consistent with all of the other things that we're doing, especially in the municipal side of things, to really include one of the scenarios that looks at a much more advanced emerging technology situation. So really adjusting the irrigation water requirement, really adjusting the efficiency of the deliveries in the modeling that we're doing to see what that looks like. And a lot of that discussion had focused on the fact that, it's scenario planning was to really, kind of push that. So the decision was made by the technical advisory group after a lot of discussion on that to make that change. So that's one of those. There were some specific changes in some of those. There are tables. For example, in the municipal and self-supplied industrial, there is a table that shows the drivers and how, for example, indoor and outdoor gallons per capita per day are adjusted for each of those 5 scenarios, and there were some minor changes to those amounts. So those are just some examples, but I would say overall, again, due to all the work that went into this with the technical team prior to even distributing this to the technical advisory groups, that things were fairly well set. Not to say that we had already made those decisions, but we had done a lot of work to try and envision how we can actually quantify those scenarios. So.
Great, Greg. Any other questions for Greg? Actually, I had one, and thank you for inviting me to the TAG event. I do appreciate that. And this one has to do with the urbanization component for ag. At some point in time, like with you mentioned that you were going to use the basin implementation plans for some of that. Do you also, like for smaller type, actually, does the state demographer come into play with some of these things too, as far as just crunching the numbers, so to speak?
Yes, Director Rottenberg. So one of the first things that we did was to work on the population projections directly with the state demographer's office. We have an economics firm on the consulting team that consulted with them directly. So we do have a memo that is, I believe it's included in the, correct me if I'm wrong, Matt, but I believe it's included in the municipal and self-supplied industrial methodology as an appendix that specifically documents how we interpreted each of those 5 different scenarios with the data that we got from the state demographer's office. So the state demographer's office has projected out now to the year 2050. So we had the data there, and then that particular piece of the memo explains kind of statistically how we made those changes based on the scenarios. So for example, with urbanization, we actually defined certain counties that we had modified up or down statistically based on those different scenarios due to an interpretation of how urbanization would occur. So there's one, most of that is along the Front Range, of course, but there is a scenario that describes on the I-70 corridor. So there were counties, in that example, there were counties in the I-70 corridor that were in that definition that were changed respectively as a part of that. And then, we've discussed this a little bit before, and I need to follow up with you a little bit more, Director Wattenberg, but we do have a documentation in both the municipal and self-supplied industrial piece, as well as the agricultural piece that describes how we are addressing urbanization. So how we've looked at those lands, with the data that we have, where urbanization is occurring that we know, and how that is projected and how we're accounting for that as a major driver.
Great.
Is the environmental and recreational piece and how we are looking at that. We were tasked with looking at more of an environmental gap this time around, really trying to get more to the quantification, and I understand that is always sensitive. So where we have settled on that is the environmental and recreational flow tool that I briefly mentioned before, that basically will take data as the output from the hydrologic modeling, overlay the environmental and recreational attributes, certain attributes that are more flow related, and really begin to show where things are being more impacted or less impacted. So it is a quantification of sorts, and so that will certainly be sensitive. And we had a good discussion about that last week with the environmental recreational tag, that we really want to make sure that we don't set back efforts based on some of the critical input we might receive, and some of the sensitivities around that. So we need to be very careful how that's done. We certainly understand the history there, but we, like everything that we do with the evolution of the water plan and the basin plans and this update now, things are progressing and changing. We have better data, and that's a good thing. And we need to, look at the data, not hide anything, but make sure that gets out there. So there certainly will be hot button issues, and that's something that I've been trying to figure out, which I think is a big piece of messaging now, of us trying to get out in front of the roundtables and really explain what this is and what it isn't. Another potential issue or real issue, I would say, is how this really dovetails not only with the future basin plans, but with current basin efforts. Most importantly, with the Yampa White Roundtable, they are doing their own modeling efforts and have initiated that for some time now, since they've completed their basin plan. So there were some concerns there that we would come in, with our more prescriptive, broad kind of statewide analysis that would somehow supersede what they're doing at a basin level. So we've done our best thus far, I believe, to help reassure them that no, of course, that the local planning efforts are extremely valuable, and we support that, and that we, of course, are tasked with doing a broad statewide analysis to provide that framework. So I certainly don't know exactly what other issues may come up, but I'm sure there will be some. And one of the things that I've told the technical advisory groups is that obviously this will not be perfect, very, very far from it, but I think it will be a very good step in the right direction. It'll be an improvement from last time. And I think one of the other things for the board to consider, that I've been giving a lot of thought to, and that the technical team will really be keeping this in mind, of course, as we go through the analysis, but is how we really two things I would say: how we put out the draft data. So again, like most studies, we're not just going to release a final study. We will have the data and drafts of the study and its various components that we'll release. So exactly how we do that, and kind of what that process is with the roundtables, how it's publicly posted, and kind of what that feedback loop is, This does conclude the technical advisory group process as we've designed it. We really need to get that input, make those changes, be able to finish that and then move on to do the analysis. We can't keep changing things, keep getting comments. So that process has been closed, but some of the technical advisory group members have expressed interest in providing feedback in the future. So not to say that we wouldn't lean on those stakeholders again, but that we need to figure out what that feedback loop is as we get into the draft products of this. The other big thing that I was going to mention is really the this story. As we get the data from this, how do we get that out there effectively and really convey what the story of this study is, in that it's very, very different from the infrastructure gap that we had done before. That was, it had a gap number that you could really hang your hat on. And this will have, many numbers. It will have a whole lot of data, from the models, basin-wide, spatially, different nodes, different scenarios, 5 different scenarios. So there's a whole lot going on with it. And I think we have a very big job ahead of us to figure out, what that data is, of course, what those assignments are to the roundtables, for the basin planning, but how we get that out there effectively and what the message is around that. And I keep thinking about Colorado River water availability study, that was a wonderful study. It's very similar, created a whole lot of data that I think is very helpful for water planning. But there were certainly some issues with, the broad range that was released when a lot of constituents, I think, wanted, a number. So it's, there are issues like that we need to give a lot of thought to with the technical team and with the board.
Sure. All right. Any other questions for Greg? I don't believe so. Thank you. Good report. Let's move to agenda item number 11.
Good morning. For the record, Rob Veal from the CWCB. I'm presenting here agenda item 11, notice of the 28 recommended ISF appropriations. This is an informational item only. No board action is required at this time. Pursuant to in-stream flow rule 5C, staff has provided notice to the ISF subscription mailing list that at the January 2018 board meeting, staff may recommend the board form its intent to appropriate up to 13 ISF recommendations. As detailed in the board memo, these recommendations are located within water divisions 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. In addition, at the March 2018 meeting, staff plans on bringing one additional recommendation on Himes Creek in water divisions 7. This recommendation has required extra staff evaluation and stakeholder outreach, causing it to be delayed a few months from the normal schedule. During the past year, staff has visited and conducted field work on each of these recommended reaches. The staff has also done public outreach, including meetings with county commissioners and various other stakeholders. The water availability analysis for each of the recommendations is almost complete, and staff is currently working with the recommending entities on finalizing the recommended flow amounts, and staff is preparing executive summaries for your review. This is all I have today, but I can answer any questions.
Questions for Rob? Director Hawkins.
Thanks, Rob. And this is more of a comment than a question, so I hope that's okay. I've had some outreach from some of the constituents in Dolores County and Montezuma County about the Disappointment Creek segments, and I will be meeting with some of those constituents in the next month or so, but wanted to let the board know that I have had some direct outreach as a board member about those 2 segments.
And we plan on contacting the Dolores Water Conservancy District 2. BLM is now almost at the point where their recommendation has been finalized. So we'll have the recommendation that we proposed to bring towards the board to give them so they'd have more information. So it's going to be different than the recommendation that they've seen so far.
And thanks for that. I appreciate that.
Further questions? I don't believe so. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we should be able to move to agenda item number 12.
Mind if I pull this back? I like to glance at my slides when I'm talking. Good morning, Linda Bassey with the Stream and Lake Protection Section. This is agenda item number 12, request for water acquisition pilot process. And this is an informational item with no action required, but we would really appreciate getting some input from the board on what you all think about this. We have some people from the Colorado Water Trust that also are going to get up and do a part of this presentation. Andy Schultheis is the new executive director of Colorado Water Trust, and Ann Janicki is one of the staff members. They'll be getting up after I go through most of it. Water Trust came to us with this proposed pilot process. It's a way of approaching the in-stream flow acquisition program. It's not changing anything about the in-stream flow water acquisition program, but rather it's looking at a strategic approach to water acquisitions that's similar to the approach we have for new appropriations, where we have a workshop and we have a date by which we like to see in-stream flow recommendations. This would be where we would have a date by which we'd like to see expressions of interest in the acquisition program. Right now, the Water Trust and CWCB staff, we get phone calls all year round from different water rights owners who might be interested in participating in our program. And so it's time consuming and kind of random. And we're not saying we still won't answer those phone calls, but we're hoping that having a more structured approach will conserve our resources and enable us to prioritize any proposed acquisitions that we receive and get some focused support for the acquisition program. And this process would apply to all types of in-stream flow acquisitions, temporary leases, long-term leases, permanent purchases or donations, and also might involve some activities by the Water Trust in connection with people putting water into a conservation program, which wouldn't involve CWCB. So I have a list of a lot of goals of this program. We really want to inform water rights owners about voluntary market-based opportunities to share their water with rivers that are that need water. And we want to invite them to talk with us about that. And we want it to be a user-friendly way for them to express interest in the program and investigate working with us. And we're hoping that it will streamline our process and conserve some resources. An important goal of this process is to add flows to rivers in need while working with all water users, agricultural, any water users who want to participate in the program, municipal. And we're hoping that this will facilitate implementing water plan objectives that are related to a strong, healthy environment. And so I guess the key thing is that we want to communicate with water rights owners and give them options. And we're not trying to sway people to participate in the program, but we're thinking this is going to reach people who are already thinking about potentially doing something different with their water. And we're also trying to encourage hearing from them once a year, but that doesn't preclude us working with them at other times of the year. So the launch will be at the annual in-stream flow workshop in conjunction with Water Congress on January 24th. And Water Trust staff and CWCB staff will give presentations, an overview of the in-stream flow program and all the different tools that are available, process and how people can participate if they're interested, a preliminary offer form, and a timeline for the process. And so the operation of this process is that an interested water right owner would submit the preliminary offer form by April 30th. And that form, it's pretty short. It just requests basic information on the water right, what it's decreed for, CFS, what type of transaction they're interested in exploring with us. And then after that offer form is submitted, the Water Trust would perform a confidential review of the water rights to see if they have potential to provide stream flow benefits. And after that review, they would talk to the water rights owner and give them the results of that review and ask if there is potential, say, we'd like to start working with CWCB on this, and then get permission to branch out on who they're talking to about it. So if there is potential, then all the parties would consult on the next steps and look at the type of transaction, develop the documents that are necessary, and then do whatever is needed to do to get approval from this board. And then either Division of Water Resource approval if it's a temporary lease or loan, or water court approval if necessary. And then once we have that approval to actually use the water and coordinate on managing and keeping records of the use. So the criteria that we're looking at to kind of screen out water rights that we don't think will have a potential to provide stream flow benefits, we're looking for interest from people who own absolute surface water rights for direct flow or storage, conversion rate greater than 0.5 of a CFS, storage rights greater than 20 acre-feet, that are relatively senior to other water rights on the stream, and that have a good a record of historic use that's continuous and somewhat recent and cannot be on the abandonment list, and decreed for any type of beneficial use. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Andy Schultheis and Ann Janicki. And Ann's going to get in a little deeper into the timeline and the process. So I was thinking it might be good if we could just deal with questions after their presentation, if that's okay with the board.
Is that all right with everybody? I will continue with that.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. My name's Andy Schultheis. This is going to be the least substantive and probably the shortest presentation you hear today. I basically just wanted to get my face in front of you and to introduce myself. As the new Water Trust Executive Director, I think all of you knew my predecessor, Amy Beatty, and I have very big shoes to fill, but I'm very happy to be here at my first. So Colorado Water Trust, I think most of you know what it does, but a few of you might not. I won't read the slide to you. I'll just emphasize a couple of points on it. This is our 15th anniversary. We were created in 2001, well, 16th, 2001 to, in part, to amplify and support the work of CWCB in its in-stream flow program. We are currently working in several areas of the Colorado Water Plan, adding and implementing stream management plans and finding flexible ways to share water between the environment and agriculture. And we are, as you know, a strictly market-based organization. We work within the system to try and find creative ways, which we've done over the last few years, to keep water in streams for beneficial use. That's who we are. That's who I am. Please call me if you want to talk more about my background or where I hope to take the organization. So for the substantive portion of the presentation, I'm going to turn it over to Ann Janicki and Karen Wogsland and take it from here.
Paul microphone. I'm Ann Janicki. I'm with the Colorado Water Trust, and I am going to kind of backfill some of the information that Linda already provided to you. So this is a pilot process, and we'd really like to get your feedback on this. Linda kind of walked through what the proposed process looks like. This is a graphical representation of that. I'm not going to repeat what she says. I just want to call your attention to a couple things. She mentioned that we would be launching the request for water process in January at the in-stream flow workshop with CWCB. And you know, we're seeing this as sort of the new front door for the in-stream flow acquisition process. This would be where we would hope people would, come into the program and express their interest. From January through the end of April, we will be doing some outreach. We're expecting to do a couple webinars to kind of get the information out to the rest of the state. And we're asking folks to submit. We have a preliminary offer form that will be located on our website with links to CWCB's website so people will be able to find it. But we're asking them to go ahead and submit that preliminary offer by the end of April. The Water Trust staff will conduct a confidential review of the water rate to determine whether there are potential stream flow benefits. And then we will respond to all the offers, hopefully by the end of July, and let people know if there is a potential stream flow benefit and what perhaps some of the options are for them. And at that point, if the water right owner is interested in moving forward with a stream flow project, we would sit down with CWCB and the water right owner to discuss what the requirements are moving forward. And it would all be dependent upon the type of tool that they're interested in using. And that timeline would also be sort of determined by that tool. Right now, the types of transactions that we see a lot of interest in, there's really 4 of them right now. There are water conservation programs, which were actually created by the legislature back in 2013 and then expanded to most of the state just this last session. We have short-term temporary in-stream flow leases. These were leases that the Water Trust actually had about 5 of them that were implemented in response to the drought in 2012 and 2013. Longer term leases and then water right donations or purchases. These would be arrangements for the use of water for stream flow benefits and would require some water court action. So the timeline for those processes would be a little longer than perhaps the water conservation programs or the short-term leases. So that's kind of a rough timeline of what we see the process looking like moving forward. For this early part of the year, again, the initial screening would be through the end of July. And then in July, we would sort of pause, talk to the water right owners, see what they want to do. And then the second part of it would be determined by the type of tool that the water right owner selects. A little bit of background on how this concept kind of came to be. I mentioned that the Water Trust operated a similar program back in 2012 and 2013 in response to the drought. That was a request for water to help supplement water short in-stream flows during those drought years. We ran the program in 2012 and 2013, and each of those years we received about 35 offers of water rights, and I think we reviewed roughly about 100 water rights as part of those offers each year. Out of those offers, we developed 5 short-term temporary in-stream flow leases that were administratively approved by the state engineer's office and by CWCB. And so those leases are actually in place right now. They can be implemented in 3 years in a 10-year period. Several of them have been implemented twice, and we have one that's been implemented 3 times up on the Yampa. So that was sort of where we got this idea. Some of the things that we learned from implementing that program were that there were a lot of efficiencies, like Linda mentioned, that were to be gained by having a timeline and to be able to sort of plan your workload out, manage your staff and your financial resources in response to those offers. So we're hoping that this proposed process, and by creating this new front door, that both of our organizations will realize some efficiencies here, and that we'll be able to respond to these water right offers in a more timely fashion rather than just sort of having them come in randomly through the year and having to juggle workloads. I think that's all I have for now. So I guess I'll turn it back over to Linda, and we'll see if you guys have any questions we can answer for you. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Angie or Andy at this point in time? I don't believe so. Linda.
So we would just be really interested in hearing what you think about this.
Director Hawkins.
Thanks for those presentations, Linda. I have sort of a 2-part question. Maybe I'll try to keep them separate so I'm not confusing. How will this program take into account other partners that might be doing field work on the ground in the basins to come up with potential acquisitions to bring to the board?
I think that those other partners could either work through this process, or we would work with them on their own timeline, because we're aware that there are some other organizations out there, groups who are working with water users. And so that's why I tried to emphasize that we're not precluding that. I think This is probably more aimed at individuals who are interested but don't really know how to approach it and need some help with looking at how to participate. So it would not preclude working with those organizations.
Could those organizations work with a landowner to put in the form and then work with the water trust in this process, or would that sort of happen separately?
We would welcome that. The former, not the latter.
And then my second question is, will there be a point in this vetting process that key agencies like the Division of Water Resources and Parks and Wildlife are brought in to discuss the implications of an acquisition?
Definitely. I mean, whenever we bring a proposed acquisition to the board, we consult with Colorado Parks and Wildlife and Division of Water Resources. And I think that even before that, in the vetting process, well, it is a confidential review, but once there was clearance to broaden who we talk to about it, earlier, before we bring it to the board, if we saw that there were issues, potential Water Rights Administration issues, we would certainly consult with Division of Water Resources. And we always consult with CPW to get that biological analysis that we need.
Other questions? Director McLeod.
This is not a question, but a comment. And I discussed this with Linda the other day on the telephone, but I wanted to repeat it for the benefit of the folks from the Water Trust. The messaging here is very important. We don't want to give the impression that we're trying to persuade irrigators to relinquish agricultural water rights. The McKinley Ditch project is an example of one that you all worked on and are still working on. And in the Gunnison Basin, that met with a lot of skepticism because of this very issue. So we worked through all that, but I think it's important that we're careful about how we describe the process. I don't see anything different here except you're giving it structure, which is a good idea. But because we're making it a formal process, we got to be very careful about the messaging.
Director Gallagher.
Yes, I too have had this discussion with Linda as well. And so I agree with Director McLeod that it's important that we don't try to do a hard sell on this because the optics may not be beneficial to the agency. It is one of our, we're not out there to start looking like we're out there aggressively purchasing these things and taking water away from agriculture. This is to make sure it actually is shared with agriculture. Linda, I'm a little confused about how the money thing is going to be. I assume that on the temporary basis, we'd be doing these leases. Then if we were actually to purchase these, that would be a permanent, one-time purchase. But on the lease basis, what we're struggling with, for example, on the releases from Stagecoach Reservoir is how to do this on a sustainable local basis, that we're not always coming back to the state for money for this purpose, and look to local entities to provide that lease money.
Was that a question, Jay?
That's a question,
okay.
Yes.
First, I'll address the, we are very aware that we need to be sensitive in the messaging around this, and we'll work very hard to maintain that sensitivity. And we're looking in the thesaurus for words willing, voluntary, willing. There's got to be some other ones, but no, we take it. I'm not meaning to be flippant. We take that seriously, and we don't want that to be how this process is viewed. Regarding the funding, depending on the type of transaction, the board has $1 million annually in the construction fund for water acquisitions. The Water Trust does separate fundraising for certain projects that it works on. I don't know how the local angle would work. You had said that you were hoping for sustainable potential local funding.
Well, as Andy had referred to, and also Angie, how this is done on the local level. We value these releases from Stagecoach for the benefit of our reach below Lake Catamount particularly. And we want to find a sustainable way to keep these going year after year, at least have these in reserve when we need them. And we have a local group now that is meeting to discuss just that issue. How do we keep this ongoing so we're not going back to one bucket or another, or coming with our hat in hand to get funding money for this every year?
That's definitely something we'd like to work on figuring out. Sure.
Hi, I'm Karen Wogson. I'm also from the Colorado Water Trust. We've pondered this funding question, of course, a lot. Our thought now is that once we have vetted a project and we want to move forward with it, it'll have a project plan, and a big portion of that is the fundraising plan. And so, like Linda mentioned, the Water Trust does do its own fundraising. And so the idea that we leverage different sources and we find local support if it's there. I assume it would be there for doing the project, and that we sort of figure that out for each project, because every project is different, and that's how we envision it.
Further questions, Jackie?
Just not a question, just wanted to go on the record that CPW supports this pilot program. The Colorado Water Trust is an important partner for us in achieving our goals for in-stream flow.
Thank you. Any other board members? I actually had one question, and this is probably for either Angie or Andy, either one. Do you happen to have a particular basin or basins that are more focused than others?
No. We would just be offering this opportunity to any water right owner who was considering using their water rights to benefit stream flows. So it would be statewide, totally voluntary, totally optional.
All right, thank you. I believe, go ahead, Dr. Staub.
Yeah, I think another thing that's important about this is that it's a pilot type of project, and so we can get regular reports back on how well this process or structure is working, and have an opportunity to fine tune it if so needed.
Thank you. Go ahead, Linda.
I don't have anything further.
Director Yon.
I'm still trying to wrap my hands around in-stream flow and all those things. So, so I guess the way I'm looking at this is this isn't necessarily a new program. You're just providing structure to a current program. Is that correct?
That's correct. It's really a new process. I know the memo says request for water acquisition pilot program. And then when we were putting the PowerPoint together, we said it's really a pilot process.
Okay.
So yes, it's
that
not
might
changing.
Be a better way to refer to it, because when I looked at it, I thought, well, this is a whole new program that we're looking at, and it's not a new program. It's just giving, as Director McLeod said,
giving timeline and some more structure to our existing program.
Yeah. I just want to get that straight in my head. So thank you.
Further comments, questions? I don't believe so. Thank you.
Thank you for your input. And if you are going to attend the in-stream flow workshop to hear about the new in-stream flow recommendations, we hope you'll also stay to hear about this. Thank you.
All right. Instead of breaking for lunch at this point in time, let's go ahead and do agenda item number 13. And then we'll have lunch after that. Morning.
Morning. For the record, Twee Patton, Floodplain Mapping Coordinator at the Colorado Water Conservation Board. I'm going to be giving you an update on the floodplain mapping programs and the Colorado LIDAR plan. It's an informational item only, but I hope you'll find it interesting as well. I also have a handout. Thank you. This is an agenda of what I'll be discussing today. I'll give you an introduction to the FEMA Flood Hazard Mapping Program, and then I'll talk about our award-winning Colorado Hazard Mapping Program, and then I will talk about the Colorado LIDAR plan and take your questions at the end. So the Colorado Water Conservation Board is a cooperating technical partner with FEMA, and we have been since 2002. This is a picture of that agreement, which was signed July 15th of 2002. As a CTP, we are able to receive funding from FEMA for large-scale mapping projects. We also partner with them on all of our large-scale mapping projects. Since 2002, we have received approximately $18.2 million from FEMA for projects, and the Colorado Water Conservation Board with local communities have contributed about $5.9 million to projects since 2002. Around the time we became a CTP, FEMA came out with the MAP modernization program, sometimes referred to as the MAP mod program. This was a 5-year FEMA program focused on updating the old FEMA flood insurance rate maps, what you see on the left, into what we call the digital flood insurance rate map, which is the image you see on the right. There was a limited funding. It was $1 million for the entire nation to update these maps. And so it wasn't really to update the floodplain maps, but rather to convert them into a digital platform. So just a quick overview of what flood insurance rate maps are. These maps, this is an example of a flood insurance rate map. It shows what your 1% annual chance flood is. Those are the areas shown in blue. The areas in yellow are the 0.2% annual chance flood or the 500-year flood. The handout I gave you gives you some of the common terminology that we talk about when we talk about floodplain mapping. It is a federal program, so there are a lot of acronyms that we use. So I hope this will help you. The zones at the top of the handout are zones that we see on a floodplain map. I will be referring to Zone A or Zone AE, which is a 100-year floodplain. These maps are used to rate flood insurance. So if a community participates in the National Flood Insurance Program, anyone in that community can purchase flood insurance. If a home is located within a floodplain and they're paying a mortgage, the homeowner is required to purchase flood insurance. These maps are also used by the local communities to regulate as a regulation tool so they can make wise land use decisions. And these flood maps can be found on the FEMA Map Service Center or the FEMA National Flood Hazard Layer. You can search that online and it'll pop up a website. You can type in your address or your community and it'll bring up the flood map for your area of interest. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the components that go into a floodplain map. We start with the terrain data or elevation data. Typically it's LIDAR data, which I think I've mentioned previously, but LIDAR is just high quality elevation data. There are 2 levels of floodplain mapping that I'll talk about: an enhanced level floodplain, which is a Zone AE floodplain, and that includes base flood elevations or what your 100-year water surface elevations are. If it is an enhanced level floodplain, we supplement the terrain data with survey data because terrain data doesn't always pick up items like culverts and bridges. The other level of floodplain mapping I'll talk about is what we refer to as a base level floodplain, and we sometimes refer to that as an approximate Zone A floodplain, and that type of floodplain still shows you what your flood risk is, but there's no survey involved. It's a little bit more approximate. Then we calculate how much water is coming down to that stream or from the watershed, which is the hydrology, and then we put these components into a hydraulic model to calculate what the water surface elevations are, and from there we map our floodplains. So I mentioned earlier that we do partner with FEMA on these projects. We also partner with the local communities. We all have a role to play, the local community officials, that are participating in the NFIP or the National Flood Insurance Program, they have local floodplain regulations that they have to adhere to, and so they use these maps for that purpose. And then we all work together to convey the flood risk to the constituents, and they know how to make better decisions at the local level. So at the end of the 5-year program, FEMA transitioned the map mod program into what we now know as the risk map program. We still provide updated floodplain mapping, but in addition to that, they've expanded the program to increase public awareness to flood risk and to help communities take actions to reduce those risks. The traditional regulatory products that we've developed through the map mod program, we have the digital files that make up the map. We have a flood insurance study and the map itself. These are regulatory products, and they are subject to statutory due process requirements. Then with Risk Map, we provide some additional products, what we call non-regulatory products, to help local community officials convey the flood risk to their constituents. These products are non-regulatory, and so they're not subject to statutory due process requirements. Here's an example of a non-regulatory tool that we've been providing to the communities that has been very effective. It's called the Changes Since Last Firm. This is an example of one in Chaffee County. So what you see here is the old or effective floodplain overlaid with the proposed or new floodplain. So now we are able to tell people where the flood risk has changed. The areas in red show where flood risk has increased, and the areas in green show the flood risk has decreased. And this is a map of Colorado. It's just an overview of where we are with the mapping program. The counties in green show the communities that have gone through the map mod or the risk map program and have updated floodplains or digitized files. And then the counties in white are still utilizing those old paper maps. So now I'll talk a little bit about CHAMP. I think we all remember the 2013 flood event. From that event, the state identified communities that needed support identifying new risk. That created Senate Bill 15245, which initiated the Colorado Hazard Mapping Program. And the main focus of this program is to study flood-affected streams, as well as modernize those communities that are still utilizing paper maps. It's a 3-year program which started in July of 2015 and is slated to end June of 2018. And the goal of the program is to help protect life, health, safety, and promote communities across Colorado to become more resilient. So this map shows you an overview of CHAMP Phase 1 and 2. This is the areas that were most impacted by that flood event. And so this table here shows you some stream miles. SV stands for the St. Vrain watershed, which is the southern area here in blue. BT is the Big Thompson watershed on the northern side. And I had mentioned earlier what base level and enhanced level mapping is. And then on the lower right is the South Platte. We're restudying from Fort Lupton to the state line for a total of 683 stream miles. And this is the single largest floodplain map update that we have ever undertaken. CHAMP Phase 3 focuses on those areas that are still utilizing paper maps. This map looks a little scattered, but what you see here, the county, oh, I'm sorry. Oops. The going the wrong way. The counties in blue hashed are areas where we will be providing them with digital files. We're not updating the floodplains there. And then the counties outlined in black with the small blue areas are stream reaches, which we are reanalyzing. The funding for Phase 3 was very limited, and also the terrain data is very limited when you kind of go out there on the other rural parts of Colorado. So that's why the areas are a little bit smaller reaches than we really wanted to study. Okay, so now I will talk a little bit about the Colorado LiDAR plan. This image shows you what raw LiDAR data points look like. It's kind of a neat picture, but you can see those points that are taken on the ground are really detailed. The raw points are processed and developed into a digital elevation model, which is the basis for our floodplain mapping. So the more detailed LiDAR data we have, the better and more accurate our floodplain maps are. The Colorado LiDAR plan was completed in late 2015. Shortly after the flood event, a lot of local, state, and federal agencies came together to come up with a priority for acquiring LiDAR in Colorado. There are a lot of interested parties wanting LiDAR data because it is used for different purposes, although obtaining funding for LiDAR is not so easy. This map shows you the regions that we broke out for the prioritization. And so from the results of the study, we found that the southwest part of Colorado was our highest priority, and the estimate to acquire that LiDAR was about $3.3 million. Luckily, we had that plan in place because in 2016, FEMA had some additional funding, and they awarded us in October of 2016 with $3.3 million for LiDAR acquisition in Colorado. Since then, we've been doing a lot of acquisition of LiDAR, so we were able to acquire some parts of southwest Colorado. So we reprioritized our areas. So this map shows you a summary of what we have available in pink. So we've made some good headway in acquiring LiDAR in Colorado. We're currently processing these areas in blue, and what we're proposing to acquire in the next couple of years with that FEMA grant and some other contributors as well are the areas in the white hashing. So I think we're making good progress in acquiring LiDAR for the entire state. It was a 5 to 7 year plan. And so within the next couple of years, we're going to be, that's probably about 30,000 square miles, almost 30,000 square miles that we'll be acquiring. And lastly, I just want to give a shout out for our Colorado Hazard Mapping website. It's just coloradohazardmapping.com. It's a great website. We're in the middle of revamping it. But if you're interested in learning more about CHAMP, about the Colorado Risk Map program, or acquiring any kind of data, the LiDAR data is public information, so anyone can obtain it. You can go to this website and fill out a form, and we'll be able to provide that data to whoever wants it. So, and that's all I have. So I'll take any questions you may have.
Questions? Director Yon.
Thank you very much. That was a good presentation. I just had a question. You showed a map of Chaffee County that had increases in hazards and decreases in hazards. What's the reason for those increases? Is it the channels changing, or is it better data, or?
It's a combination of all of those things. Kind of depends on the area. It could be better data. There could be some changes in the river itself, development. Things like that will cause changes to the floodplains.
Same hydrologic model when you're, as they did in the past, or is there a new?
It depends. Again, there's varying factors. So I think for Chaffee County, there were areas where we did update the hydrology. Sometimes it's a more extensive hydrologic model, and sometimes it's just regression equations that we use to update the hydrology.
Thanks.
Any other questions? I don't think so. Anyway, great presentation. Thank you. At this time, I've got a couple announcements before we break for lunch. Unfortunately, lunch is only provided for board members and staff. It's kind of just the way that is. The other one is after we come back for lunch, and let's try and be back in our seats approximately at 1 o'clock, we will be in executive session for most of the afternoon. So public that is here kind of take that into account, and also our online listeners kind of take that into account. For recess this afternoon, we will come back and address agenda item number 6, and then we will break for recess. Any other? Then we are officially in recess until 1 o'clock this afternoon. Thank you.